Worried because I feel like the gender stuff only gets started at like chapter 5. And like I don't know if you've heard, but I asked him at the end of the class, like somebody like, should we be focusing on the gender or should we be representing roles? And he said we should focus on the gender, like when we telling the story of the economy, but we should bring up the gender aspects of it. So that's essential. Yeah.
Okay, oh, I gotta take a picture, you guys. Weekly snapshot. Say cheese. Okay. Sorry, 2 minutes late today. It's been a tough day. If you don't mind, I read all of your two slips and marked them, but I didn't get to photocopy them. I normally photocopy all of them and keep them as evidence. I mean, as examples that I might use in the future. So I like to photocopy and have a copy. So I'll get them back to you tomorrow. Okay, today we're talking about the influence of pragmatics on, I don't like the word syntax so much, it's on grammar. Syntax means, things that are in the same order. And so syntax became part of linguistics when in the early 20th century they started to take apart the different parts of language and talk about them separately as if they had nothing to do with each other, what we call a componential model of linguistics. And I don't believe in that because I think it's all one package. You really can't separate things out. But this book was written at a time when people just generally, the book I'm kind of basing a lot of our lectures around, even though I'm talking about it in my own way. Is this on? Yeah. Oh, this guy's not on. So the idea is that in the past, people studied syntax as if it was not related to language use or anything else. And people in pragmatics, though, have been arguing that first they started with just a few things, saying that, oh no, there are pragmatic phenomena. And so then they had like basic syntactic rules, and then they had a few pragmatic things. Now we understand that it's really all pragmatics, that the structure actually arises out of use. So you cannot remove understanding of the structure without looking at the use. In other words, you have to look at the interaction between people in their interactions, their conversations and whatnot. So one of the things, though, that we look at in looking at the structure is how the information is packaged, because the information that we present when we say something to somebody is always going to be linear, right? So whether it's written or spoken, it's always going to be in a particular order. And so that order is going to influence how you interpret it. I'm going to talk much more about this next week when we talk about kind of interactional linguistics, what Green talks about as conversation analysis, but because they talk much more about the pragmatics of what's called projection, how the order of what you say things influences how you interpret them. But as a basic thing, there's several different concepts involved here, and so the basic idea, though, is that you have to package the information in a particular way. Now, to some extent, this is problematic in that it assumes the meaning is in the words and stuff, but certainly how we say something, the order in which we say things, and how we package it in the sense of what structures we use, because the structures that develop didn't just develop out of nowhere. They developed for particular purposes. Language is the way it is because of how it's used. It arises out of our use, and I'll talk more about that next time too. So we have developed, in most languages, you have ways of marking the structure in such a way that allows the hearer to understand kind of what's assumed information and what's kind of new information. And so we call that information structure or information packaging. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, how this works in several languages, and then go a little bit more in depth in Chinese, because in Chinese it's the major principle involved in word order in Chinese. In English, it's less influential in word order, but more influential in intonation. Because a word order, as I'll talk also about next week, word order in English is determined more by grammatical role and grammatical role and also grammatical mood. But we'll talk about that more next week. So there's two aspects of this information structure. One is the information status of particular reference. So whether a referent is new itself, the first time it's mentioned in a conversation or something like that, that's a new referent. And then there's also a different kind of thing where the referent may not be new, but it's new information. So new information that goes together with old information to create some new proposition or whatever, that's a different type of information. So we're going to talk about both of those. The first type is the category of information status of reference. So if you have a referential NP, a noun phrase doesn't have to be referential, so then there's nothing to talk about. It's just if I say, I don't have a pen, then there is no pen, so there's nothing to be aware of. So that there's no point in talking about the information status there. So when we talk about information status, we're talking about referential uses of noun phrases, which means there's some entity or situation or something that it's referring to. And the noun phrase is referential if the speaker intends for it to refer to a particular entity which exists within a particular universe of discourse with continuous identity over time. This is a kind of formal definition. And basically, it's just anytime a noun phrase has a referent. So if you want to make it simple, you just go with that last four words. The referential NP can be either identifiable or unidentifiable to the addressee. So they may know what you're talking about, or they may not know. If it's identifiable, it will be in one of three what we call activation states, following Chafe 1987, where if we're talking about if it's the current topic of conversation, then it's what we call active. So if I've just mentioned, I bought a car and it's really wonderful and so on, and we're talking about the car. The car is our current focus of consciousness, so the car is active in that discussion. So that's why I can say it. You can refer to it as it because it's the current focus of what we're talking about. If it's accessible, it's not the current focus of consciousness, but it's somehow the hearer can infer what you're talking about, either textually, in other words, it's somewhere in what's being talked about, situationally, like it's something in the room or wherever you are, or inferentially derivable. Like if I say, I bought a refrigerator, but the door was broken. The door there is identifiable because it's you can infer I'm talking about the door of the refrigerator. And then if it's inactive, it's not in the focus or periphery of consciousness, but in long-term memory. This one is not really so important, but Chafe includes it, so I'm including it here. He uses the example of a novel where on page 1 they mention a letter, and then they don't mention the letter again until page 108. So everyone has pretty much forgotten about the letter by that point, so it's been inactive for a long time, even though it was mentioned in the book. A referent will often be unidentifiable when first introduced in a discourse. So the first time you mention something, the first time you start talking about it. So like, oh yeah, I bought a pen. So it has a referent, but I don't expect you to know which pen I bought. So then I use an indefinite thing in English, an indefinite marker in things, because it's unidentifiable to you. But it can be introduced in two different ways. As a brand new unanchored referent, like I just said, a pen. That's what we call a brand new unanchored referent. Or as an anchored referent, one where the unidentifiable referent is presented as related in some way to an identifiable referent. So if I want to talk about somebody that my addressee doesn't know, I can make that person a topic, not by saying a guy. I can't just say like a guy died today. That wouldn't really go well. But if I say a guy I work with died today, that becomes newsworthy, because at least putting that anchor, the relative clause there that I work with, somehow shows the relevance of this person, right? So you can, even though the topic is actually unidentifiable, the hearer can make some kind of sense as to why I'm talking about this person. And so we do that kind of thing all the time when we want to refer to something, particularly when we want to make it a topic and it's not the current topic and it's not something that we expect the hearer to know. We will use this kind of structure, what we call an anchored reference. Okay, where's and a referential NP is specific if it's identifiable to the speaker, regardless of whether it's identifiable to the addressee or not. So this one is not from the point of view of the hearer. What I talked about just now is from the point of view of the hearer. This one specific is from the point of view of the speaker. So whether the speaker has some specific referent in mind or not. So if I say something, I'm looking for a pen, then it may be I'm looking for any kind of pen, so that's non-specific. But it may be I'm looking for a specific pen. Oh, I've got this Mont Blanc pen that I lost and now I can't find it. I'm really looking for it. So then if I say I'm looking for a pen, that's a very specific pen in my mind. And both of them are unidentifiable to you, but so specific is only relative to the speaker. If the individual identity of the referent is not important to the speaker, it is non-specific, like in I'm looking for a mouse, any mouse is okay. And so then there's no particular one that I have in mind. Now, generics are a kind of special case. They're not referential, but they're often treated as if they're referential because you expect the hearer to know about that class of items, right? So you're kind of treating the class as identifiable. So, and then there's also predicative noun phrases like a lawyer. Those are always necessarily non-referential. So if you say he's a lawyer or he's whatever, he's a doctor, he's an idiot, or whatever you want to call it. When those things are the predicate of a clause, they're not referential. There's also nouns that occur in compounds like bear hunting or ski. What do you call it? I was thinking another one. Like ski jumping. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, ski jumping. So where the noun comes before the verb, that's also non-referential. It just is there to tell you what kind of action you're doing, right? So ski jumping, you're not just jumping around randomly. You're doing it on skis, and you're a particular kind of jumping. And that noun phrase under the scope of negation, like I don't have a pen, that's necessarily non-referential as well. Or there are no pens. If I say there are no pens here, that means of course there's no reference. So that's non-referential. And this gives us the following hierarchy of referential noun phrases. So if a noun phrase is referential, it might be identifiable, it might be unidentifiable. And if it's identifiable, it could be active, it could be accessible or inactive. If it's accessible, it could be accessible textually or situationally or inferentially. If it's unidentifiable, it might be presented as an anchored or an unanchored noun phrase. Now, it's important to point out that this cognitive category of identifiability is different from the language-specific category of definiteness. In a lot of the linguistics literature, you will find this very confused, where people, when they're talking about identifiability, they use the word definite. Like if you read things about Chinese does not have a category of definite and indefinite noun phrases, but they will often talk about identifiability of noun phrases using the words definite and indefinite noun phrase. That's problematic because definite and indefinite is a grammatical category, not a pragmatic category. What we're talking about is the pragmatic category of identifiability, and that all languages have to deal with. Not all languages, very few languages actually, not few, but not a majority of languages have definite marking. They have ways of marking identifiability, like using deictic pronouns or things like that. So if I say this book, and in fact the word the in English comes from the word that. It's just a reduced form of a particular case form of that. Definiteness can be said to be the grammatical coding of an NP as to whether or not the speaker assumes the referent of the NP is identifiable to the addressee, though it's a very rough definition. As with all of these things, once they are established, that may have been the original motivation as well. Not motivation, I should say, but how it came to become grammaticalized. But it's not a one-to-one correspondence. It's really hard to write a rule of when do you use the. But and the relationship between definite coding, to the extent that it exists, and the cognitive status of reference varies greatly between languages. So, for example, some languages you put the definite marking in front of proper names, like the John, or something like that. Or here in English, the only one we do is the Donald. But other than that, we don't do that generally. But some languages do that, and they have other things that they will use definite marking for that we don't in English. It's also important to emphasize the distinction between the activation status of a referent and the information structure categories we'll talk about below. So when I say activation status, I mean this identifiability. That, as I mentioned, is different from the what I say here is the cognitive status of the pragmatic relations between the parts of a proposition, which I'll go into now. So this we call presupposition and focus. So what we're going to be talking about basically is a unit of information. What was originally talked about as information unit by Michael Halliday, one of the early pioneers in this field. I'm using Knut Lambrecht's work here, so I'm using the term pragmatic assertion rather than information unit, but it's basically the same concept. It's a combination of kind of old new information and new information together to create some kind of new information. So we can't understand anything totally new by itself. We always have to kind of embed something new in something old in terms of what we know already. In order to make sense of it, we relate to what we already know. And so the pragmatic assertion will include, in most cases, it will include both some presupposed new old information and some new or focal information, focus. So presupposition is basically, Michael Halliday called given, and focus he called new. And he didn't like those terms, and I don't like those terms either. So presupposition basically means information that is shared between the speaker and hearer, or can be created as needed, like we saw with, what in pragmatics they often talk about as presupposition. And focus is information that the hearer cannot supply and is not available to it. So the pragmatic assertion is a proposition which the hearer is expected to know or believe or take for granted as a result of hearing the utterance. So in other words, it's the entire message that the hearer is trying to get across. And so the two parts of this are the pragmatic presupposition and the focus. So the pragmatic presupposition is a set of propositions evoked by an utterance. That shouldn't be in an utterance, should be by an utterance, sorry. Which the speaker assumes the hearer already knows or believes or is ready to take for granted at the time of speech. So it's basically everything you know, or everything you need to bring to bear in understanding what the person said. That's all the pragmatic presupposition. Whereas the focus is that portion of a proposition whereby the assertion differs from the presupposition. So in other words, it's all the stuff that you don't know that's relevant to making this proposition. By here, the proposition is the same thing as what we're talking about as the pragmatic assertion. And languages have developed what we call focus structure, which is a grammatical system. And all grammatical grammar, by the way, is grammaticalized. That's why languages differ so much. Each language, the speakers of each language determine, which things they want to talk about a lot and how they want to talk about them, and so they grammaticalize different systems. But all languages have some type of focus structure system where it's grammatical system used to mark the focus of the assertion in a sentence by setting it off against the pragmatic presupposition. So basically telling the hearer, okay, what part am I assuming you know already, and what part am I assuming you don't know, and then highlighting that new part in some way. So like in English, what we do is we put an accent on it. As we'll talk more in a minute, you stress, you put some phonetic stress on the unit that marks the new information. In other languages, you may change the word order, and I'll show you examples of that. But each language does something to help the hearer identify the difference between old information and new information within the utterance. Now, as I mentioned, focus structure is not a question of identifiable versus unidentifiable NPs. It's an indicator of a semantic relation holding on the level of the sentence or proposition as a whole, not an expression of information properties of individual sentence constituents. So it has to do with the totality of the utterance, or basically the idea that's trying to get across. So for Knut Lambrecht, he talks about a threefold distinction of three types of information. There's between information is conveyed by the proposition, in other words, the totality, the pragmatic states of the reference of individual constituents in the minds of the speech participants, that's the identifiability, and the pragmatic relations established between the reference and the propositions. So how those things all fit together. So those are different things that we need to keep separate, and they're often not kept separate. If you read articles about this type of stuff, it's often quite confused. So I should stop for questions, but I think if I explain the focus structures first, it'll be clearer, and then I'll ask the questions. So Knut breaks it down. Here's a typology of focus structure types, focus structure constructions. Even though they differ in language, they do similar things. And he breaks it down into three types called predicate focus, sentence focus, and he calls it argument focus. I call it narrow focus. And so these manifest particular structures of this configuration of given and new, or predicate, presupposition, and focus. So with predicate focus, that's the most common one you find in every language. It's the most common type you find in any text of any language, where it's just basically topic and comment. So you have a topic plus a predicate phrase. They may be in that order, they may be in a different order, but there is a topic that you're talking about, and you're saying something about it. And this is the most common thing we do in interactions, is I say my car is nice, or I just bought a new pen. So each of these is a topic comment expression, and so it's one of the main things we do in language is just to refer to things and then comment about them. So if I say something like, what happened to your car? So then the car becomes activated because I've just mentioned the car. So that's now an active referent, and it can also become the topic of, you can continue to talk about it or, not talk about it. But the answer is my car broke down. So in English, you would say my car broke down, where there's a stress on the down part. Now the accent doesn't mark just that word as being in focus in this context. It marks the entire predicate as being in focus. So my car or it broke down. The reason I can use it is because it is active. But either way, it's not relevant to the overall information structure. The point is that the car is the topic and broke down is what you're saying about it. And in English, the accent on down marks that as predicate focus. In French, in Italian, you have la mia macchina si è rotta. And again, in all of these languages that I'm talking about here, you have largely sentence final focus. Now, not all languages do. Many languages have sentence final focus. Some languages, which I'll talk about next week, I'll talk about Tagalog, has sentence initial focus. So it's very different. So you have comment topic instead of topic comment. But so Italian has something similar to English, where si è rotta. So here you don't even need to mention the topic. You can just say la mia macchina. You can leave that out. My car, you can leave out altogether. I just say si è rotta. Or with French, ma voiture, you can leave out, but then there is a pronoun elle, which refers to the car. Et en panne, my car is broken, and again the stress on pan. And in Japanese, you say kuruma wa kushoshita, where the kuruma the wa marks kuruma, the car, as the topic, and it's not necessary since the hearer knows what we're talking about. So this one is pretty straightforward. This is what we think of as, when you think of, okay, what is the word order in English? This is the kind of thing you think of what is the word order in Italian. But there are other types of structures that we will see in a minute. The information structure in this type of example can be broken down like this, where my car broke down is what was said. The presupposition is that the car is available for comment as a topic. And the assertion is that the car broke down. The X equals broke down means the car broke down. And focus here is broke down, it's just the whole, even though in this sentence it's very short, it could be a very long sentence, whatever the comment about the topic is. So the focus domain, the grammatical domain in which the focus appears, is the verb plus the remaining post-verbal core constituents. So basically everything except the subject in English. Now, topics are not always subjects. What is necessary is for there to be an aboutness relationship. So topics are what the clause is about. And so in this predicate focus type structure, you have a topic and then the rest of the clause is about that. In some languages, you can have multiple topics kind of in a kind of embedded topic comment structure, like in Chinese. I'll show you in a minute. As for John, I think he's a great guy. So here, in a way, there's kind of two things going on. So you're putting forward John as a topic, but then you're saying, I think he's a great guy, which is also kind of subtopic. Or tulips, you have to plant new bulbs every year. So it even works in questions. You can also have that type of thing. Or in Japanese, sono kashi wa futoranai, where those sweets, and you notice here, in a true topic comment language like Japanese, you don't have the same tight relationship between the topic and the predicate you don't have a grammatical relationship between the topic and the predicate the way you do in English. So English subject-predicate structure is very different from a language that has just topic comment, like Japanese or Chinese. So in this case, sono akashi, those suites actually have nothing to do with, they're not, a direct argument, we would say, in linguistics for futoranai, to get fat, but it is how you get fat. But in Japanese, you can just make those suites as the topic. And in Mandarin, 那些书叶子很大. This one has a double topic, and we'll talk more about Mandarin in a minute. So those trees, the leaves are very big. The topic in the topic comment construction is an entity within the pragmatic presupposition, or generally within the pragmatic presupposition. There is a kind of acceptability scale that Knut talks about as well, that usually the more identifiable, the more active, or the topic is generally something active. It doesn't have to be, though, but it makes it easier for the hearer to understand why you're talking about this referent if it's identifiable, and particularly if it's active. So the topic and the topic comment construction is generally an entity within the pragmatic presupposition that has the function of naming the referent that the assertion is about. So it's just basically this, that's what defines topic. It's what the rest of the clause is about. Now Lambrecht gives it a formal kind of definition. He says a constituent is a topic expression if the proposition expressed by the clause with which it is associated is pragmatically construed as conveying information about the referent of the constituent. You can forget that because it's what the clause is about. That's all you really need to know. That's what he's saying there. Even though he put it into academic gobbledygook, he's really saying, I'm a real believer in, let's make it simple. It doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be this kind of academic talk. In much of the literature on information structure, topics taken as synonymous with the given or presupposed part of an utterance, but it's actually not necessarily the case. Lambrecht says what's presupposed is not the topic itself, nor its referent, but the fact that the topic referent is expected to play a role in a given proposition. In other words, once you identify something as the topic, you presuppose that it's something that's involved in the rest of the proposition due to its status as a center of interest. One therefore ought not to say that a topic is presupposed, but that given its discourse status is presupposed to play a role in a given proposition. That's a slightly different sense. There is a correlation, however, between the pragmatic state of the topic referent and its acceptability of the topic. As the more acceptable the topic referent of an utterance is, the less processing effort will be required to properly interpret the utterance. So if it's an active referent, it makes the most acceptable topic. In other words, it's the easiest for the hearer to understand, okay, why are we talking about this, right? So if I say, what happened to your car? And then I answer, my car broke down, then there's no problem with understanding that sentence because I just asked you about the car, so I know why you're talking about car. With an accessible referent but not active topic makes a somewhat less acceptable topic because the person has to figure out, okay, why did you all of a sudden start talking about this referent that we weren't talking about before? Or an inactive referent makes an even less acceptable topic, and an anchored brand new referent makes one of the least acceptable. That should be unanchored brand new referent makes one of the least acceptable topics. If a topic is not identifiable, that for example it's an unanchored brand new referent, the utterance will require pragmatic accommodation. In other words, you have to go along with the speaker. So you really don't know, okay, why is he talking about this? So you kind of wait until he's spoken a little bit more until you figure out, okay, now I understand why he's talking about it. Or maybe you never find out why he's talking about that. So we call that pragmatic accommodation in order to interpret what the person said. So you have this scale of most acceptable to least acceptable. And the particular form that the representation of a referent takes can be seen as instruction for the addressee to construe the referent as having a particular degree of accessibility. And this guarantee is based on the assumption on the part of the hearer that the speaker will choose a form for the utterance that it will allow the hearer to create the proper context of interpretation with the least amount of processing effort. So this goes back to what I talked about in the first lecture, that the the speaker will try to make the best ostensive act that they can make with the assumption that the hearer will be able to understand it. And the hearer also assumes this, that the speaker will try to make it easy for the hearer to understand. So by looking at the form of the references, you can know something about what the speaker is assuming the hearer can understand. So in terms of the coding of the topic referent, this depends partly on the activation state of the topic referent and partly on the function of the topic. So topics that either name a new topic referent in the discourse or are simply involved in the expression of a semantic relation between the topic referent and predication, that's one type. And then there's topics with the naming function. Topics with the naming function are generally coded as lexical noun phrases, while those with the latter function are most often coded as zero or unstressed pronouns, as they are generally active reference. So, so this is one of the things that confuses some people, is that topics are assumed to be given, but actually sometimes topics can be new. And so this is where you can see the distinction that you have to make between given and new as reference and the topic comment and other information structure categories. So sometimes when we have a topic, it could be either a relatively new topic that I'm bringing in or changing a topic, or it could be a contrastive topic. So Trump had a town hall in so-and-so, but Biden had a town hall in so-and-so. So, there I'm contrasting the two topics. And so they can be identifiable but focal, or they can be unidentifiable. And so they're doing kind of somewhat different things in those contexts. So it's not that all topics, they're all about what the clause is about. That holds. But they will be coded differently, because if I'm continuing to talk about something like, what happened to your car? It broke down. I will normally, that's the kind of continuing type. I'm not changing topics. It's not a contrastive topic. So then I will just use a pronoun or a very unstressed noun phrase. Whereas if it's a contrastive topic or a new topic, in English at least, I will stress it. And you will get some stress on it probably, or you'll have a full noun phrase at least. In some languages, you don't use a pronoun at all if it's a continuing topic, and you only use pronouns when you're changing topics. So like a friend of mine studied Burmese for a time, and then he went to his Burmese teacher and he said, okay, I'm going to try out a story on you. So he told a story of a guy. He said, well, he got up in the morning and he ate his breakfast and he went outside and he fed the pigeons and he did that. And the Burmese teacher said, that's great, but who are all those people? Because in Burmese, it's like Chinese, you only use a pronoun. The guy had used a pronoun in each of those sentences. In Burmese, you only use a pronoun when you have a change of topic, not when you are continuing the topic. So if we combine these two, the correlation between the activation state of a referent and its representation in the discourse on the one hand, with the topic acceptability scale on the other, we can come up with a scale of markedness relations between the form of a referring expression and its function as topic or focus. So if you look at it from this end, these are the most marked as topic, and these are least marked as topic. So I should say it from the way it's written here. So these are the most normal or least marked as topic. This is a little bit more marked, a little bit more marked, more marked, more marked, the most marked. As focus, though, it goes the other way. So as focus, this is the most unmarked. In other words, the most common. Unmarked here just meaning most common, easiest to identify, the easiest to process. Then definite, then pronoun, stressed, and then unstressed pronoun, then clitic pronoun, and then zero. So there's a nice correlation there in terms of the coding of reference, in terms of their possible functions. Now, while a non-active referent as topic is an anomaly, an active referent in a focus relation is with an asserted proposition is not. So it's actually pretty common to have an identifiable referent as your within your focus, which is not a problem because it doesn't affect your interpretation at all. So the reason why it's unusual to have an unidentifiable topic is because it makes it hard to interpret. But having an identifiable focus does not make it hard to interpret. It actually might make it easier to interpret. It requires no accommodation or extra processing effort. From these non-typical cases, we can see that focus structure is not a question of identifiable versus unidentifiable noun phrases. It's an indicator of a semantic relation holding on the level of the sentence or proposition as a whole, not an expression of information properties of individual constituents. Okay, so that's predicate focus. That's the most common one, and that's a little bit too much maybe on topic. The next type is quite interesting, and Knud has a whole paper, a separate paper he wrote later after the book came out on sentence focus, where the entire utterance is within the focus domain, so there's no topic. And what happens here is very different in different languages. And that's why he wrote a separate paper talking about the many different ways that they do it. But he saw some kind of commonality among them, and it basically you're treating it like you would treat an unmarked object, the kind of thing you're talking about. But I don't quite agree with that analysis, but it's close to what's really happening. So if somebody says, what happened? There's no referent mentioned, there's no, nothing that we're putting forward as a topic, then you could say, my car broke down. I don't know if you can hear the difference between my car broke down, my car broke down. So those are quite different in English. Where you put the stress makes a big difference in the interpretation. So if you put the stress on the first word, my car broke down, then it makes it, at least with in this short example, it's just the one noun phrase gets stressed, and it's the first one, it's the sentence. So the subject. So in his article, the way he talks about it is it's when subjects are treated like objects. So normally you would have the accent on the predicate, but in this case, to show that it's not a normal topic comment structure, that the entire clause is in focus, he says that it's treated the same way that you would the focus, and by moving the stress in English, but in other languages you use different mechanisms. So my car broke down marks this as a kind of an event, right? So sentence focus is generally presenting some kind of event, or sometimes introducing a new referent into the discourse. So it's often, it's not a very common, well, we use it, but we use it usually at the beginning of a story. So like there was an old woman who lived in a shoe, or you start a story with it. And I'll show you an example of that from Chinese as well. And so in Italian, what you do is you don't move the intonation, you change the word order. As I mentioned, the final position, clause final position, is the unmarked focus position. So what they do is they put what otherwise would be the subject, they put in final position rather than initial position. So mi si è rotta la macchina, with the la macchina, my car, you put at the end of the clause to show that it's not the topic, right? So this is very much like what happens, we're going to talk about Chinese. You put something after the verb to show that it's not a topic. So here again, it's just presented as an event. Or in French, you do something quite different, where you break it into two clauses, and you say j'ai ma voiture, which is kind of a weird thing to say because it says I have my car, and then qui est en panne, which is broken. And so it's basically doing the same thing as what Italian is doing by putting the thing that would otherwise be the topic in post-verbal position to show that it's not the topic, but then you want to say something about it anyway, so then you follow it with a relative clause. So the qui est en panne is actually a relative clause. So I have my car, which is broken. So that's that's one way of doing it, to mark something that would otherwise be a topic as not a topic, because the kind of definitional aspect of sentence focus is that it doesn't have a topic, at least according to Knud. Although some people are arguing that some sentence focus actually does have a topic. And in Japanese, you say kuruma ga kushoshita. So in Japanese, you use the ga particle instead of wa. And this is, a lot of people talk about this as a subject particle, but it's not really a subject particle, it's more of a focus particle. There's a very good paper by Stanley Thompson and a linguist named Ono, who they did a textual study, and they looked at lots and lots of Japanese discourse and found that it's really just marking information structure, this ga. And there's also stress on both kuruma and kushoshita. And here is the idea is that there's no clear presupposition. I mean, of course, we do have some information in our heads about things. The assertion and the focus coincide, and the focus domain is the entire clause. So the sentence would be, my car broke down. There's no presupposition. The assertion is the speaker's car broke down. The focus is also the speaker's car broke down. And the focus domain is the clause. So this particular one, if you look at different languages, you find different types of patterns. It's most, as I mentioned, it's most often used in presentational situations, presenting either a new situation or event or referent or both. As in, once upon a time, there was an old woman who lived in a shoe. That's a English folk tale. So in this one, you have two stresses because it's long. And it's kind of like the French one a little bit, where you have an existential followed by a relative clause. So there was an old woman who lived in a shoe. So you're kind of introducing and then saying something about the old woman at the same time. So if you're late to the office and you say, "Oh, my car broke down," right? So you're saying that not because you want to tell him something about your car, you want to tell him something. You want to give him an excuse as to why you're late, right? And then there's this reverse kind of order that we do sometimes in English, although it feels more literary. Then there came a rider, or then came something. So like, there was this fight going on already, and then came the police, and then everything got messed up. So like, then came the police. That's this kind of thing where it's not that we're saying something about the police, we're saying something about an event, that the police coming and treating it as an event. Or, "Oh my God, a duck just flew into the living room." So here again, you have two stresses, one on the subject to show that it's not a topic, and then on the living room, because it's very long, you put a second stress on the predicate as well. So there are different manifestations. Now the last type is relatively straightforward. The focus domain is limited to a single constituent. So like if I said, "I heard your motorcycle broke down," and the person responded, no, my car broke down. Now this one sounds the same as predicate focus in this particular sentence, but not in all sentences, and I'll give you more examples in a minute. But my car broke down, here it's only my car that's in focus, not the whole clause, not the predicate, just the word my car. Actually, only the word car is the predicate domain is my car, but the actual word car is the thing that's in focus here. And so this is the case where in English the stress does mark the focus, only that word. Whereas in the other type, the stress marks it as focal, but not just that particular word. In Italian, you have two possibilities. And actually, in English also, we have the possibility of using a clef construction. Clef constructions, if you learned about these, we have pseudo-clefs and clefs. And what they basically do, they're called clefs because, the word cleaver, right, like a chopper is called a cleaver because it cleaves, it cuts. So cleft is just a past participle of cleave. So it just means a sentence that's been cut in half and kind of moved around a bit. And the reason why we do those clef constructions is to mark the focus. Because in a clef construction, the thing after the the copula verb, like it was my car that broke down. So if I use a clef construction in English, it was my car that broke down, then we know that marks very clearly what's the focus there, and it's narrow. It's always narrow focus. If it's a clef construction, it's always narrow. So in Italian, you can either, just like in English, you can either say si è rotta la mia macchina, where you put my car at the end of the clause, again with stress, or you can use this clef construction, e la mia macchina che si è rotta. In French, you use the clef construction, c'est ma voiture qui est en panne. So in each of these cases, it's the thing after the verb. So a is the verb here. Here, wait. Si è rotta. Wait. Si. This a here, not that one. This a la mia macchina. And here it is, and so this is the verb here to be. It is my car. And in English, of course, if you say it is my car, then it is the verb we're talking about. So the thing that comes after the verb. So again, it's pretty consistent. You put things after the verb, it marks them as focal. And in Japanese, kuruma ga shoshita. So here again, you use ga, but you don't stress the predicate in this case. You're just stressing the individual item. So in this type, you have my car broke down as the sentence or utterance. You have the presupposition that something of the speakers broke down. And the assertion is the thing that broke down is the car. And the focus then is just the car, but the focus domain is the entire noun phrase. Okay, so that was a lot. Any questions up to this point about these concepts? Yeah.
So activation, can that happen non-linguistically?
Yeah. So that's what I mean by situationally inferential. So if I could be, I would say, well, maybe not in English, because in English we always have to use pronouns. But if it was like Chinese, then I could say naba. I could say, where I don't have to refer to the thing at all, but you could know what I'm talking about just from the fact that it's between the two of us and it's the only thing worth picking up. So yeah, it can be entirely situational like that. Any other comments, questions?
The choice of this set of languages, the Italian, French, Japanese, and English, was that?
That's Knud. Knud did that, but he expanded it later on. But so actually, some of these concepts actually go back to Michael Halliday. But Michael Halliday really only talked about English and Chinese, mostly English, and most of his published work was on English rather than Chinese, even though he started his theory in working on Chinese. But Knud has put a lot more attention on looking at many different languages and how they manifest these different focus structures. Again, I wouldn't use these kind of made-up examples. I would use natural examples, but this book was written basically in the 80s, when people still thought it was okay to use made-up examples and things like that. So right now, actually, I'm working with a group of people to write kind of introduction to information structure, updating Knud's work. Knud's now retired and not really doing much, but I have a kind of an online discussion group with some colleagues in China who are very interested in this, and we're, especially for a lot of the Chinese readers, reading the original Knud Lambrecht's writing. As you saw, Knud Lambrecht's writing is not that easy to understand. So I may be the only person who actually really understands what he wrote, because I worked with him page by page through the entire book when he was writing it, giving him comments on every page. Although I should have told him, write more simply, because so many people have told me they just don't understand what he's talking about. But I have a summary of it in a book I published in 1997 called Syntax, Structure, Meaning, and Function, which is downloadable. I don't make any money from these things. Chapter 5 of that is this kind of a summary of Knud's work. pretty much what I'm talking about here, and that people find much more understandable. So that gets probably read more than Knud's book, actually. But yeah, I think this really needs to be updated. And also there are certain concepts, like he's taken for granted that the meaning is in the words, and also what the presupposition is somehow expressed in the sentence, and all of these other things. So there are certain problematic things about it, but that was what we were doing in the 1980s. And this is one thing that people really need to understand. When you read older articles in linguistics, you have to understand that at that time, we had a different way of thinking about language altogether. It was very much influenced by structuralism, particularly Chomskyan style structuralism. And so right now we think very differently. And so there's some things we can use from older work, but we need to really update a lot of the way we talk about things. Because now we think of it, much more pragmatically and much more cognitively. In early structuralist stuff, they actually denied the relevance of anything cognitive. Meaning. They just denied meaning was relevant to language. It's like, how could you deny? Now it's all about meaning. So it's really quite a different perspective. I actually have a course next semester where I talk about this development from, the history, kind of the history of linguistics from the early 19th century till present. Talking about not just how our beliefs change, but why, and the people involved and things like that. Okay, any other comments, questions? Yeah.
For this narrow focus example, since there is no verb before my how is it different from the sentence focus? Well, I still understand.
Say that again?
Like, what you mentioned, like for the Italian, French, and Japanese.
Right. So that's in the clef construction, right? So in the clef construction, you have a copular verb because the sentence is kind of cut in half. One part is nominalized, and then the two parts are linked together with a copula. Like is in English. It's called a copula because it couples the two together. This one, my cover-up is not a copula sentence. It's not a clef construction. So in English, the way we mark it is just with the stress. That's the only thing that marks it.
But since the emphasis is like the sentence, how is it like distinguishable?
Well, that's the thing. So in speech, in context, very few things are that ambiguous. But in writing, it's totally ambiguous. And so this is why clef constructions developed, because clef constructions allow you to disambiguate. So clef constructions are much more common in writing than they are in speech. So this is the thing, is languages, because in some cases like this, it's not always the case that the subject is going to be the one that's in focus. And I'll give you an example in a second. But in this case, it happens to be the subject because this is a very short sentence. It's the only noun phrase mentioned. So that's the thing that's in focus. And so here, it just happens to be the same as the other one. So in this case, you might want to use a clef construction to disambiguate. Otherwise, it is ambiguous. At least in English and Italian. Now, many languages have a clearly defined unmarked focus position, as I mentioned. For quite a few languages, especially verb-medial languages, if the verb is in the middle of the reason why the verb is in the middle of the clause is because the end of the clause is the focus position where you would normally have new kind of information there. In verb final languages, it's normally the immediately pre-verbal position is the main focus position especially for narrow focus. So languages like Korean and Japanese and whatnot, where the verb is at the end of the clause. English and Chinese are verb medial, and the unmarked focus position is in final position. But then somehow I forgot to put it here. Like I mentioned, Tagalog it's a verb initial language. There are verb initial languages. They're not that common. But the predicate comes in initial position because the focus is in initial position. And so that works in a very different way. Unmarked narrow focus is narrow focus falling on an element in the unmarked focus position, whereas marked narrow focus is when it falls on any other place. So in English, for example, I can say, John gave, if the question was, who did John give the book to yesterday? Then the answer could be, John gave the book to Mary yesterday. So then you're just accenting Mary and that gives you the narrow focus on Mary. But if I said, when did John give the book to Mary? Then you say, oh, John gave the book to Mary yesterday. Then I'm focusing on yesterday, and so the accent is on yesterday. Or if I say, what did John give to Mary yesterday? Then you say, John gave the book to Mary yesterday. So then the accent is on, its narrow focus on the book. Or did John lend the book to Mary yesterday? He said, no, John gave the book to Mary yesterday. So you can even focus on the verb. So this is also a kind of narrow focus. It doesn't have to be a noun phrase. Or, Bill gave the book to Mary yesterday. No, John gave the book to Mary yesterday. Here, the narrow focus is on John. So in English, we can do this. As I'll talk about next week, the word order is controlled by the grammatical mood and grammatical relations. So we don't generally, except for a few examples, a few exceptions, I should say, we don't normally put the subject after the verb, but some languages will do. But so what we do is we just change the accent. Now, some languages are much more strict in terms of their accent. They keep the accent in one place and they change the word order depending on the information structure. Okay. Excuse me. Forgot to bring a drink. So I want to give you an example of how Chinese works, because Chinese, I found that you can explain all of the word orders patterns in Chinese easily with information. So it's just these three information structure concepts. Just to mention, Wilhelm von Humboldt, one of the early 19th century linguists in Germany, he wrote some very good work on Chinese, and he said Chinese consigns all grammatical form of the language to the work of the mind. In other words, much of it is left to pragmatics. Now, in some ways, he's right in the sense that it had no morphology, or very little morphology, but it does help the hearer to understand things like information structure. So Zhao Yanren, probably one of the best Chinese linguists ever, in 1968 published a grammar of spoken Chinese, and he said clause structure is simply topic and comment. A corollary to the topic comment nature of predication is that the direction of action in an action verb in the predicate need not go outward from subject to object. Even in an NV N-bar sequence, such as go yao ren, dog bite man, it is not always certain that the action goes outward from N to N bar. And so what he's talking about here is that the word order is not determined like in English. There's where the word order kind of determines who's doing what to whom. In a topic comment structure, the sentence is just telling you what the clause is about and what you're saying about it. And he said all clauses in Chinese are topic comment, although sometimes the topic is not there. So it's just the comment part. And we'll see that too. And so you can't tell when somebody says something like, if I say in Chinese, 成绩单已经发给学生，学生已经发了成绩单. If I say something like that, students already distributed grade sheets. Whereas so you would understand that particularly as the way maybe you would think, oh, it was the students who were given grade sheets. But if I say 老师已经发了成绩单, I'm using exactly the same structure, but I've changed student to teacher, and then you might have a different understanding that it's the teacher who distributed the grade sheets to the students. So in Chinese, there's no marking of who did what to whom. And this is one thing that's consistent pretty much in Chinese, which is very different from English, because English and the other Indo-European languages put a lot of work into marking who did what to whom. Whereas the Chinese don't really care that much about that, and so they didn't grammaticalize that type of system. What they did, have is these patterns for marking information structure, which we'll talk about. So he showed how Chinese doesn't have a a subject predicate structure. So he used examples like 她是个日本女人 when he's talking about what he meant by that is his servant is a Japanese woman. 她是个日本女人 where it's not he who is a Japanese woman, but his servant who is a Japanese woman. Or 他是一个美国丈夫 he is literally it would be he is an American husband, but it's really the case that it's somebody who is married to an American. Or 你也破了 which is kind of meaning, 你的鞋子也破了 your shoes are also broken. Or 我比你尖 which meaning like 我的铅笔 my pencil is sharper than yours. So in English, you would always have to have this very tight relationship between the subject and the predicate. In other words, the subject has to be an argument of the predicate, which is a very narrow scope. Whereas in Chinese, it's not like that at all. It's just the topic is just anything that the rest of the clause is about. And he said word order is not determined by and does not affect the interpretation of actor versus non-actor. He said the clause is analogous to a function in logic. The argument is an argument of the function, and the truth value is unaffected by its position in the clause. There are no exceptions to topic comment order in Chinese, though there are some clauses that only have comments like 下雨了, fall rain, and change of state marker. I'll talk more about that in a second. Probably the second most famous and good grammatical Chinese scholar in China in the 20th century, Liu Shuxiang, he used the word subject. Actually, Zhao Yanren also used the word subject, but they both defined it very clearly as topic, not as like an English type subject. And basically, he said it's whatever comes first in the clause, and it can have any semantic role. In other words, it can have any role in who did what to whom. So-called subject and so-called object can be filled by any semantic role, and to a certain extent interchangeable. And I'll give you examples of those in a second. So-called subject is simply one of the arguments of the verb that happens to be in topic position. And so the difference in interpretation in these examples I'm going to show you is not one of actor versus patient, but in terms of what is topic and what is not the topic. So this might be a little bit hard to read, but these are his examples. 窗户已经糊了纸. So the window was already pasted with paper. In English, you have to say it that way. In Chinese, all you have to do is reverse those two words, 窗户 and 纸. You can say 纸已经糊了窗户. There's no change in the verb. There's no change in anything else. Just reversing those two words, and it's no problem. You say the paper already pasted the window, but in English you have to use a passive because in order for having something that's not the agent to be or an instrument to be the subject, then you have to use a passive clause. In Chinese, you don't. Chinese doesn't have what we normally think of as a passive clause. Or you say 水浇花, so the water 水浇花, the water waters the flowers, or 花浇水, the flowers water the water, which doesn't really flow well at all in English, but it's the same kind of thing. All you have to do is reverse the two words. It's the same meaning though in these things. So changing the word order does not change the meaning in the sense of what we think of as who did what to whom. But all it does is changes which one we're taking as a topic. So like in the Chuanghu example, the window, we're taking in 18a, we're taking the window as the topic. In 18a prime, or 8r, whatever you want to call that thing, we're taking the paper as the topic. But the meaning is the same, that the paper was put on the window, was pasted onto the window. In the old days, they used to paste paper on the window. Or 老头子晒太阳, 太阳晒老头子. So the old man basks in the sun, or the sun shines on the old man. We actually use two different verbs in English here, but in Chinese it's the same verb, and you just it's the same situation you're talking about, but you're presenting it from a different perspective because you choose a different topic. But But that's the only thing that changes is what topic you're choosing to profile it from the point of. Now, Lee and Thompson, if you know anything about them, they said word order in Chinese serves primarily to signal semantic and pragmatic factors rather than grammatical relations such as subject, direct object, or indirect object. They use the expression Chinese is topic prominent, which is, some people have misunderstood it as an English-like subject-predicate analysis of the clause, but with frequent topicalization. That's actually a misreading of Lee and Thompson's work. What Lee and Thompson basically talked about was what Zhao was talking about. Basically said the same thing as Zhao, but they used a different terminology. So they called the actor of the clause, the agent of the clause, the subject. And so people thought that there was an actual subject-predicate structure as well as topic comment structure. But that's a misreading of their book and their paper. Now this guy Lepola came along and he said there are no pivots, there are no restricted neutralizations of semantic roles in Chinese. In other words, nothing we can call subject, which we define as restricted neutralizations of kind of who did what to whom in different constructions. And so subject and direct objects are not relevant concepts in Chinese, and it's not possible to define subject and object in terms of word order in Chinese, or to say that word order is determined by subject and object. So it's, in typology, Chinese is often called an SVO language, but that would imply that it has subject and object and that somehow those are related to the word order, but that's actually really problematic. So if you say, these are some real examples. So 张三想死我了 could mean Zhang San missed me so much that he nearly died, or I missed Zhang San so much that I nearly died. And 没有人可以问问题 could mean there is no one who can ask questions, or there is no one to ask questions of. And one of Zhao's examples is 这个人谁都不认识. This person doesn't know anyone, or no one knows this person. So there's nothing to mark who did what to whom here. You just have to infer from the context what the semantic roles are. All you know is the pragmatic roles of which is the topic and which is not the topic. So the basic concept, the basic way that word order works in Chinese is that the topical or non-focal noun phrases occur pre-verbally, and focal or non-topical noun phrases occur post-verbally. So let's look at some examples. So here's a natural example from a book called 儒林外史, an 18th century vernacular novel, which has a very nice example here. So it starts off with a sentence-focused structure. 元朝末年也曾出了一个牵涉雷洛的人. So at the end of the Yuan dynasty, there emerged, if we would put it, there appeared or there emerged an honest and upright person. So this is one of these sentence-focused structures where you're introducing a new referent, right? So here the end of the Yuan dynasty is not a topic in the sense, it's what we call a scene-setting topic, where it's not what the clause is really about. It's just setting the scene for what we're going to talk about. So what we're doing now is at that time we're introducing this event that this person was born. And 人姓王. So here we have, so this is a sentence-focused structure. And then we move into a series of topic comment structures or predicate-focused structures. So 人姓王. So that person, so here we know it's just a bare noun phrase, 人, but we've only mentioned one person, this person, 牵涉雷洛的人. We already mentioned this person as upright person. And so then when we say 人, we know we're talking about the same person. And we set him up as the topic here. Here he's not a topic, so we repeat the word 人 here as to make it the topic. And 姓王, so his surname is Wang. 命名. So here we have two comments about one topic. Actually, we have several, but it goes on. So in Chinese, you have what we call topic chain, where once you mention the topic, you don't need to repeat it again as long as you're talking about the same topic. So here we have a nice topic chain. all about this Ren, who's we find out his name is Wang Mian. So he's Xing Wang Bing Mian, and he 在诸暨县乡村居住. So he lived in the countryside of Zhuji County. So you have these three comments about him. And then a fourth comment about him is 7岁时死了父亲. This has become a very famous sentence because if you try to use the so-called SVO analysis, which a lot of people try to do, then you have to say that here we know that the topic is still Wang Mian, this guy, the Ren, Wang Mian. And when he was 7, he died his father, right? But if you take this as a SVO sentence, then you have to say that Wang Mian died his father, and his father is the object, and Wang Mian is the agent or actor that somehow died his father, right? So that doesn't really work well. So what is really going on here? This is also something that happens a lot in Chinese, where you take this structure by itself is the same structure as 下雨了. I mentioned 下雨了 for rain. So 死了父亲下雨了. It's basically the same structure. What's going on here is you're taking a unit, an event, you're making an event out of it by taking something that would otherwise be the topic and making it not the topic by putting it after the verb. So if you wanted to talk about his father from the point of view of his father dying, you could say 王冕的父亲死了. You could say 王冕's father died. But you don't. But here he's not doing that because the topic is not about his father. The topic is about Wang Mian. So what they want to do is they put the fuqin, they put the father after the verb to show that the father is not a topic, and then they treat that event, 死了父亲, died the father, as a comment about Wang Mian. So Wang Mian, when he was 7, had the event of his father dying. It's kind of like that. 死了父亲. And we actually use this kind of construction a lot in Chinese. And then it goes on, they change the topic to his mother does some sewing to give him money to go to school. So this is a very nice example of how Chinese works. This is an actual text, but it's the way that people talk all the time. And particularly this kind of structure of putting the noun phrase after the verb when it's not topical. So like if you're standing in the street and all of a sudden a car comes, you're not waiting for a car, but you just don't want to get hit by the car. You might say to your friend, "Oh, 来车了, car, come car aspect marker, come car," right? So you would say, but if you're waiting for a car, then and you both know you're waiting for a particular car, then you would say 车来了. You would say the car has come, right? So it's just a change in the word order from 来车了 to 车来了. And it all depends on whether you're treating the car as a topic or not as a topic. So 来车了 is an event, a car is coming. Whereas 车来了 means, telling you about the car that is now coming. So this is really great the way Chinese works. It's very clear in terms of knowing when something is an event and when something is a thing. Like just like 下雨了, we say rainfall because we're not talking about any particular rain. We're just talking about, this is the event of rain falling. If you're waiting for the rain, if you seeded the clouds and then the rain finally comes, then you could say, 雨终于下了. You could say the rain finally fell. Then you could make the rain a topic. So this is something that we do a lot in thing. We also can have double topic constructions, as we saw earlier. This is again something very common where you say, 我肚子饿了. I stomach hungry. It's not my stomach is hungry, but I stomach hungry, where stomach hungry is a topic common structure, and I stomach hungry is a topic common structure. So you have this kind of topic common structure embedded in a larger topic common structure. And these are reversible, but not reversible, but you have a choice when you speak of saying, if you want to, instead of saying that I stomach hungry, you can also have it as an event where I suffered hungry stomach. And I could say, 我饿了肚子. So again, you have your choice of whether you want to make the belly a secondary topic or you want to not make it a topic at all. So if you say, I belly hungry, then you make it a second topic. But if you say, I belly hungry, then you're not making it a topic at all. You're just treating belly hungry as an event. And the same thing with 头疼, you say, 我疼头, 疼了头. And with like, 我那些苹果皮, 我那些苹果皮已经削好了. So here, I'm treating the skin of the apple. Those apples I already skinned, or the skin has already been peeled. So the skin of the apple is treated as a secondary topic. But you can also say, 那些苹果已经削好了皮, where the skin is not treated as a secondary topic. You just have the one topic, the apples. So when we describe Chinese, we actually say the Chinese clauses are often, though not obligatorily, verb medial, as noun phrases representing topical and non-focal reference appear before and the verb, and focal and non-focal reference appear after the verb, with the position of any of the noun phrases appearing in the clause before or after the verb being based on their nature as topical or as part of the focus, respectively. Okay. I think we're going to stop there because it's already 5:50. Next time, I may skip this theme versus topic here because next time I'm going to be talking about this. So I'll save that for next time. We're going to talk more about theme and projection, things like that. Any questions before we go, though? Either about sentence focus generally, sentence information structure generally, or Chinese in particular. Yeah.
So just to clarify, let's say we have this example, right? 我的肚子饿了. In this case, right, it's only one topic, like the topic will be 我的肚子.
It's only one what?
So for example, right?
Yeah, 我肚子饿了. There's only, you said there's only one what? I didn't catch that word after what?
I meant 我的肚子饿了.
Yeah.
So 我的肚子 is only one topic.
That's a secondary topic. So 我 is the primary topic. You could say 我的肚子饿了. If you say 我的肚子饿了, then there's only one topic. Yeah. So that's one noun phrase. 我的肚子饿了 is one noun phrase. So that's one topic. Yeah, sorry. I didn't catch the. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions? So one of the things that people are doing now is looking at how, now that we're kind of more aware of how much languages can differ, because in the past, there was this very problematic assumption that they assumed that all languages were like English. And so they just force all languages into an English type analysis. There are still people who do this, Chomsky students generally. But there are a lot of people who still try to force, they assume there's some kind of universality to English structure, and they force that onto all languages. But there are a lot of us who have been exploring the fantastic diversity of different ways that languages or people can express themselves. And that's what makes linguistics fun. Finding uniformity is not fun for me. Finding diversity is fun. Okay, thanks very much. See you tomorrow.